Hello. Today we're going to discuss the issue of miracles and the supernatural, probably, all that is contained in the issue of miracles. And I'm with Professor Tom O'Loughlin. Tom, when we discuss miracles, what are the common issues that are related with that?
Well, normally when we hear a miracle story, the immediate question we ask ourselves is it true or false? And then a curious thing happens that people say, oh, that can't happen, therefore the whole story is bunkum. And that is by far the most simple reaction to the story. Then there's another example, and that is the one that's often found by people who are believers in the system within which the miracle story is told, and they will often suddenly search out an explanation for the miracle. So, for instance, I remember a guy I found that he was working on the nature of mirages, and he was a theologian. I wondered why he was doing this, and it turned out that he wanted to justify the story of Jesus walking towards the boat on the water, and he thought, since this cannot happen, it must have been a mirage, and they had just misinterpreted it and in the way they had recorded it. But of course, that fails to notice certain elements of the story. The story was originally told as something that was wondrous. So the question is not so much, is this miracle story true or false, but rather the question becomes, in what sort of a universe would this story make sense? So our task when we hear a miracle story is not to just simply say, it happened, it didn't happen, like in the way you would test out something factual, like did you travel on the bus today or come on your bicycle? You know, that's an either or, yes or no. It's very simple testing for that. The thing is, I look at the world in one way. The person who was telling the story looked at the world in a particular way. So you have to get into the world of the storyteller. But the world of the storyteller is different to yours, but then you have to say, and within that world of the storyteller, the miracle has to both make sense and at the same time not be a normal part of the storyteller's world. It's precisely because fishermen were not expecting to see people walking on the water that makes sense of the gospel story. Jesus was seen walking on the water. So we have to know the mindset of a world of a first century fisherman, peasant farmer, peasant in the Mediterranean world, and then go one step further and say, and in that world, what is the value of a miracle story? Because I think sometimes we say something like, oh well, they had a magical view of the world. But a magical view of the world may be that if I rub two sticks together, I can create bad luck for you. But that is actually seen as just part of the normal technology of the world. If I do it, if I go and I get the potion, or I get the magic formula, I can actually make this work. But the miracle stands outside everything that is expected in that world. And so I must ask, to try and understand a miracle story, I must make two leaps of imagination. I must make the leap of imagination from the world in which we're dialoguing today to the world of the storyteller. And then within the world of the storyteller, I have to be able to make the leap of imagination that he wants you to make, or she wanted you to make, to see the glimpse of something beyond that world in a miracle. So, in a sense, you don't ask, I always feel it's the key is not to ask, are miracles true or false, but how much imagining do I have to do to try and appreciate this?
In the book of Mark, there's commonly this motif of wonder that comes up, and surprise, I guess you could say, with the miracles of Jesus. This seems to be sometimes a common element within the gospel miracle stories. Do you think that this is a creation of the storyteller, or is it something that should be common with all miracle narratives?
I think the common element in miracle is that they are what the audience were not expecting. But I think equally, Mark is a superb storyteller. Mark in many ways, Mark is the forgotten genius of the first century. And I think what Mark does in his story, Mark knows that a good storyteller has to repeat words and phrases so that you're lulled into seeing it all as a lovely one singly harmonious tale. So I don't think there's any single formula for the miracle story, but I think there is a single miracle formula. There are several miracle forms, but there are common elements in the way Mark tells those, because we forget, Mark because he's short, the shortest, and so much of Mark is, I think there's all but 10 verses of Mark can be found in either Matthew or Luke. We tend to see him as a sort of poor relation. Well, you can get him by reading Matthew, an attitude which we can already find indeed in the 3rd century. But Mark is the forgotten genius, because Mark was the one person who realized that if you took all the teaching and all the stories about Jesus, he's the first person we know of who twigged that by making them into a sort of a biographical style, it starts at the beginning, it runs through, he went from A to B to C to D to D, and then he finally gets to his death. There's something lovely about that storytelling form, that it follows the life of Jesus. So the genius of Mark was to take bits of teaching, sayings, stories of miracles, stories of wonders, interpretations of bits of the Old Testament, and put them all together in this wonderful thing. And then in this the package is such a brilliant package that it became the dominant form. So, imitation is the form of praise. Matthew imitated him. By the time Luke writes, he says umpteen people, and of course we have the 4 canonicals, we have other gospels as well. But this brilliant genius of Mark, not to just have sayings or one-off miracle stories, and yet, but to put them into this overall biography, the good news story, the overall good news story. And the other thing about this is, Mark sees these stories, these miracle stories, as the key to the imagination that his community, his audiences, the people he's actually, performing with, they must use these as the jumping off points to why there's more to Jesus than just the guy in Galilee on his way to Jerusalem. So I think if I were asked how important are miracles, miracles are the keys to the imagination you must have to appreciate the story.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.